So good morning, everyone, and welcome. Today we have Glenn Matthews with us, and he is going to talk to us about accommodations and how to safely find accommodations, what to be aware of, and we'll have a chance for questions at the end of the session. So Glenn, if you are all set, you are the co-host and you can take it away.
Thanks, Crystal, very much, and welcome everybody. I know going to a new country to do housing and stuff like that can be stressful beyond belief. But the fact that you're here today indicates you'll have some information to deal with your situation and be aware of resources that are available to you to help your situation along the way. Crystal, is my thing showing or not? Okay.
Yes,
All
it
right.
is.
Sorry, go ahead.
It is showing. Yep.
Okay. All right. So I'll see if I can do this with my technologically challenged brain. All right. So you got to think about, what do I actually need to know about when I'm renting? You know, laws are very different and customs are very different depending on what country you're in. So you have to think about what you need to know. We actually have a process when you start out looking for a new place. We've narrowed it down to 5 different steps. So you want to think about the cost. You know, you'd be amazed at how many people don't do a budget, especially students that are, you know, this thinking everything will go along perfectly fine. But you need to do a budget. Think about what your cost factors are going to be. You know, besides tuition, the rent, maybe you're paying utilities, things like that. You need to think about whether you're going to have any roommates, whether that be, or co-tenants, people that live in the place. You know, you're going to pay less if you live with other people. You're going to pay more if you want to be on your own, things like that. Then you want to think about accommodations. And this is where most people start. They go out and jump in with both feet to look for a place to try and find something that might meet their needs. But again, we recommend the other 2 first before you get into that. Then there are leases, and there are some legal things that you need to be aware of when you're signing a document here. And I'll get into that in a minute. But there are 2 main types of rental situations. And again, I'll talk a little bit about the differences there. Then you want to think about your lifestyle. You know, if you're an individual who doesn't want to do any extra chores or whatever, like even making sure you get the garbage to the curb on time or whatever, you might think about an apartment versus a house. But a house might be cheaper if you're going to share a situation. Oh, 5 people living in a house, it's going to be cheaper than 1 person or 2 people living in an apartment, most likely. So number 1, cost. What kind of money do I need, and what does it cost to live in London, Ontario, not London, England? That's a very different story. You know, you're going to expect to pay $550 to $700 minimum. I'm going to say to you, since the pandemic, those prices have gone up, and the closer you are to the college, the more you're going to pay. I know a lot of students want to be close and walking distance, but if you're close to the college, you're going to pay more like $800 in a shared accommodation. So you need to think about that. So we always say, you get a bus pass with your tuition, you might as well take a 10-minute bus ride and save yourself $100 a month. If you're going to live by yourself, you're looking at least $1,000 to $1,300 for a 1-bedroom apartment. And even that is going up pretty quickly. The federal government in Canada does a survey of rental prices every fall, usually right around this time, but they don't release that information until January, February. And we're hearing things like upwards of closer to $2,000 a month for 1 bedroom, or 1 bedroom plus a studio, or a 2-bedroom. So the prices are skyrocketing. You need to think about what it includes. Are the utilities included? Is the internet included? Sometimes landlords will offer that as an incentive, especially in an apartment or in a house situation. But even if they say internet is included, you want to be very careful, because internet can mean a lot of things. They could be basic internet, it could be unlimited internet. So you want kind of the bandwidth defined so that you know exactly, because if there's 5 people in a house and you have basic internet, it's going to be very slow, right? If 2 people in the house are watching Netflix and other people have assignments due the next day or whatever, it's going to be challenging to get everything done on time. And think about ways you can reduce your rent. Extra roommates will generally mean reduced rent, but you want to be careful about that. We had a situation last winter where 13 people were living in a house and they had a fire. We almost had deaths. So you want to think about fire safety when you're thinking about that. But you know, if you have 5 people and you had a sick person, not the worst thing in the world, but you just got to be careful about that, because adding extra people also adds extra potential for conflict. So you want to be aware of that. You want to think about jobs. You want to think about maybe the landlord will give you a job to take care of things at the house, like shoveling snow or whatever, cutting the grass, things like that. What other costs do you need to think about? If you are covered by the provincial rental legislation, which I'll talk about in a minute, the industry standard by landlords is to ask for first and last month's rent up front. Technically, legally, the landlord can only ask for 1 month. So, you know, you want to think about that. But again, things have been so competitive. Sometimes people are offering 3 or 4 months up front to just be able to get the place. Whatever you do, and again, I'll talk about this in a minute, whatever you do, make sure you're dealing with the proper landlord. There are internet scams that you need to be aware of. We've had some students in the past lose $2,000 because they weren't dealing with the bona fide landlord in the property. You have to think about insurance, theft, fire liability. That's going to cost you $400 or $600 a year. About 5-6 years ago, we had 2 separate situations involving international students. One caused a fire which caused $50,000 worth of damage, and another one caused $60,000 worth of damage. The landlord's insurance is going to pay the landlord, but then that insurance company is coming after you to pay that amount. So it's well worth getting a hold of some insurance. You might want to look at a sample budget to figure out your costs. Those will be on our website, just to give you an idea of what to be aware of. Roommates, people you live with, you know, they may or may not be signed on the lease with you, or they may be just on a separate lease. Whatever you do, if you sign on a document with another tenant, be aware that you will be liable for them. So do not, under any circumstance, sign a document where you're going to be on a document with another tenant. You do not want to do that, because you will become liable for that individual. If you know somebody, you know, it's not so bad to do a joint agreement, but be aware along the way. Do work habits live together? Like, we have a sample roommate agreement on our website. So even if you're not on the same lease, it's not a bad idea to take the roommate agreement at the beginning of the year and say, okay, can we live by certain things? Like, some people, quite frankly, are very messy and don't care about it. Other people are very neat and do care about it. So you need to think about things. You know, some people like to work at 2 a.m. Some people like to get up at 8 a.m. So there's some things along the way that you need to be aware of. Like I said, I can't stress this enough. You're on the same lease, a legal agreement, you're liable for your roommates. So be very aware of that. The other thing is often roommates or people can't talk about money or other issues. They just assume everything's going to be fine and never be an issue. But, you know, you're going to have some joint expenses within the house. It may be utilities. It may be something as simple about who's paying for the toilet paper for the bathroom. You need to think about how you go about paying for those and how you share the costs within the room. Again, roommate agreement on our website, it helps with things, even if you're not on the same lease together. The other thing that's a little sticky these days is COVID. It's still around. There are, you know, I was talking to a work colleague 2 days ago. Their daughter is in a classroom of 24 people, and 19 of them are out of the classroom because they're sick, right? So this stuff is still around. So you need to think about COVID and what are you going to do in the house, about having friends over. You know, are there any rules about friends coming into the house, etc. Okay, finally, you're now finally trying to find a place. You have to think about, do I want to be in a house, an apartment, or am I just going to rent a room along the way? How will I find a place? So the first thing we suggest you consider is Fanshawe's website. If you go to this address, it will have two buttons, one for on-campus housing if you're interested, one for off-campus housing. An off-campus housing button will take you to a site that's run by a company called Places for Students. Those are landlords that post with the college that want to rent to students. The funny thing about being a student is there's no protection about discriminating against students. A landlord can say, I won't rent to you because you're a student. That's perfectly legal, unfortunately. There's a whole other bunch of other things they can't do, but that's one thing they can do. So those sites, those landlords that list with the college are not vetted. But if we get complaints, we take them off the site. So you know that the ones that are on the site have not been complained about to the college. Be leery of websites that are buy and sell. There are some very popular buy and sell websites, which I'm not going to name, but I'm going to tell you, 1 year I talked to every student that came to my office with a complaint. So we're talking over 350 different students, and 100% of them found their housing on probably the most popular buy and sell website. I'm not going to name which it is, but everybody can probably figure it out. What's the most popular? You have to think about where I should be looking. Where do I want to live? Like I said, if you're going to live close to the college or walking distance, you're going to pay a little bit more. The downtown campus presents some other issues, and the south campus is fairly new, and there's not a whole lot of quote unquote student type housing available in that area. It will develop, but it's going to take a few years before that happens. What some people are doing, especially if they're at the South Campus, there are express buses from downtown to that South Campus. So you get a bus pass. Doesn't take that long when you use the express bus. So you might look at places closer to the downtown campus. And actually, what a lot of people, even the downtown people, live in apartments near Oxford and Richmond, because that's a major corner in the city where there's express bus to the main campus, there's express bus to downtown and the South Campus. If you can't find something on our website which meets your needs, what we've been thinking about is, or suggesting, is take a look at the London Transit website and look where the bus routes are, and then do a Google search on apartments in London and look for apartment buildings on the bus route and contact those landlords directly. You know, and you might want to think, if you've got a part-time job somewhere else, You might want to think, especially if you're working late at night or whatever, you might want to think about housing closer to where you're working. You just have to be careful because the farther west you go in the city, you're starting to get closer to Western, and the prices start going back up again because students from Western are taking on those places. And, you know, you have to think about what type of place you want and what is, you know, the apartment has less upkeep. The house has a backyard, which is kind of nice in the fall and the spring. Or if you're here in the summer, it's kind of nice. Maybe not so much important when you're here in the winter time, because if you're anything like me, you hate the winter. As I've gotten older, it's, you know, if you haven't seen snow before, it's kind of interesting. But if you've lived in Canada all your life, it gets a little tiring after a while. The one thing I caution students about is have some patience. Again, on our website, we have an accommodation checklist. We recommend looking at least 5 places. And we suggest the checklist because if you look at 5 different places, you might forget what you saw in the first place. So use the accommodation checklist to keep up with things. Does it have everything I need? You know, laundry is a biggie. Dishwashers solve a lot of roommate issues, complaints about landlord or roommates, you know, just throwing their dirty dishes in the sink, etc. You might want to think about that. What is the condition of the place? Does it meet fire, building code, things like that? You know, if it looks worn or down, you might want to think, you know, some simple things like it's required to have a window in the bedroom, things like that. You know, is the landlord good about doing things? I know as an international person, it will be difficult to do this, but the single best way you can avoid a bad landlord, single best thing you can do is talk to current tenants. I know that seems odd, but students are quite happy to talk to other students to say whether their landlord is good or not. And if you can't actually visit the property, you might ask landlord for email contacts of people living in the place. And failing that, you might do a Google search on the landlord's name. See whether there's other complaints or other things registered that there are problems with the landlord. Is the place safe? Right? You know, lots of people coming home late at night from class or from a part-time job, things like that. So you want to make sure things are good. Are the window and door locks working properly, which the landlord's required to do by law? And you look at busing routes and see if they're close by so that you know that you don't have too far to walk from. And I always get the question about whether or not the city is safe. And generally London, you know, any 400,000 person city will have issues, but generally London's considered a fairly safe city. If you Google the London Police Service, they have a crime map on their website, and you can go to there and see where crimes are committed. The only problem with that is, unfortunately, students can be the targets of crime because students have, and smart thieves know this, students have small electronics that are attracted to thieves. And unfortunately, many students don't lock their doors, right? I gotta say to you, the simple best thing you can do is lock your door, because the thief will move on to the next property. It's kind of like with cars in a parking lot. Thieves will target vehicles. They just walk along the parking lot and try doors, keep trying doors until one actually opens up. So same thing with your house, lock your door. There are fire safety issues that you need to be aware of. You know, landlords are required to put in smoke detectors and CO2 detectors. They are required by law. and there are supposed to be escape routes. So sometimes students will take rooms without windows because they're cheaper, but they are required by law to have a window of a certain size, actually. So you want to think about that along the way. Do not, under any circumstances, sign an application or a lease without seeing the place. People say, well, I saw a virtual tour. Well, that might be okay, but I can do a virtual tour of any place in the world, put it on a website and say, hey, this is my place, come in and rent it. It's better if you do a live FaceTime with the landlord. So you see the landlord showing you the exterior of the building, including the street number on the house or the apartment. And actually you see them using a key to enter the place so that you've got proof they actually have access to the property. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than taking a place sight unseen or a virtual tour with regards to things. This is what I'm saying. Do you know what actually exists? It's just kind of everything I've said. The other thing I've just added, sorry, I'm going to back up here. Sorry. In the City of London, this will help with knowing whether it's a scam or not. In the City of London, all properties with 4 or less units, so that's not bedrooms, 4 units like apartments, must be licensed. All right. So there's the website, and I know this as Crystal said, this will be posted at some point. That's a website where you can go and check and see if the landlord is actually licensed to rent the place. Very important to check. Again, it's another way to check and see whether or not the thing is a scam or not. Now we get into leases. And this is what I alluded to earlier. What type of lease can I get? Most students would prefer a 4 or 8 month lease because that's when they're here and they don't like paying rent for months that they're not going to be here. In the past, it was a little easier to get a shorter lease, but since the pandemic and the skyrocketing of demand and the lowering of supply, almost all landlords are asking for a 12-month lease. And you have to understand the reason they're doing that is they've got 12 months of expenses. So they're asking for, almost always asking for a 12-month lease. Not saying you can't get one, but it's almost always. So the other thing you've got to ask yourself with a lease, you have to think about whether or not the Residential Tenancy Act applies. And what is that? That's the Ontario rental law. And under that law, the landlord must use what's called this Ontario Standard Lease. And you can Google Ontario Standard Lease. But when does the RTA apply? It's important to know. If you share a bathroom and or a kitchen with the owner or owner's immediate family, you are not covered by the RTA. And if you're not covered by the RTA, the landlord can dictate any rule they want, or virtually any rule they want. They can't violate the Human Rights Code, but they can basically dictate no visitors, they can dictate all kinds of things, and they could change the agreement in the middle of the year. So if you are covered by the RTA, if you sign a document that's in violation of the law, with a clause that's in violation of the law will override the clause. So I'll give you an example. If you sign a standard lease and you're covered by the act, the landlord's allowed to add addendums to that lease. Sometimes they'll put in things like tenant will pay $100 to assign or sublet their property. That's illegal, totally illegal. So the law overrides that clause, so you wouldn't have to follow it. But that's only if the RTA would apply to your rental situation. not if you are sharing with the owner or owner's family. There's a couple other situations where you're not covered by the RTA. One is if you're a tenant of a tenant, like a sublet situation, or you're in public housing, which is not usually the case with students, but there's a possibility. What is a separate versus a joint lease? So a separate lease is it's just an agreement between you and the landlord. You only have to worry about yourself. But a joint lease, and this is what I talked about with roommate situation. If you're signed on a document with another tenant and the landlord signs you up, you become liable for that other tenant. So if they don't pay the rent or damage the property, whatever, the landlord can go to you and say, you've got to pay. All right. So you want to be very careful because your liability on a joint lease is significant. The other thing is, and I thought I talked about, oh no, next page. You just want to make sure, like, just never do it. If the landlord presents you with a lease with somebody else's name on it, don't sign it. If you possibly can, and this is true for any legal document, fill in blank spaces, put a stroke or an N/A so that once you sign it, landlord cannot add something to it later on. All right, what is a guarantor? A guarantor is somebody that guarantees that you will pay your rent or any damages that you do. About 50% of landlords require it. And it's not illegal for the landlord to require it. And this is a really difficult one for international students. So earlier I said it is illegal for the landlord to ask for more than 1 month's rent as a deposit. But it is perfectly legal for an international student to offer more if they're not able to offer a guarantor. So what some international students say, I'll offer you 3 months to waive the guarantor requirement. But again, don't do that unless you're absolutely sure that the place is available and that you're not getting in deeper with a scam. Some landlords will require you to sign an application. Be very careful about signing an application because most applications, lots of people think, oh, it's just an application, no big deal. But some people will sign an application and many of them will lock you into the lease. They'll have a little clause at the bottom that says, if we accept you as a tenant, you're bound by the lease. And many years ago, I had one student sign 5 applications to rent, and all 5 landlords accepted him as a tenant. So he was bound by 5 leases. So don't do that under any circumstances. The other thing that comes up, and it's less so now because a lot of people are using electronic fund transfers, but particularly in the past with international students, they pay by cash. They haven't set up banking, whatever. The landlord is required, if you're covered by the RTA, to give receipts and get it immediately. Even if it's on toilet paper, get a written receipt immediately if you pay cash. Do not, because what could happen is, you pay cash, 2 months later, the landlord says, hey, you didn't pay me for that month. And you say, well, yeah, I did. I paid by cash. Landlord says, where's your receipt? It's going to be problematic for you going forward. How do I prove I have a lease? Under the RTA, landlord is required to give you a lease within 21 days of signing. So if you are concerned about this, what you might do is keep a copy of whatever you signed. And that's a good practice for any legal document you sign. Just keep it and make sure you've got some way to verify that it's yours. As I noted earlier, get receipts immediately. And how do I know if the lease is okay? Well, you send it to me and we'll give you feedback on whether or not it's good or not. We'll tell you whether a certain clause is legal. will tell you if the landlord's doing something proper with whatever document they've given you. The other thing I'm going to say to you, if you're covered by the RTA, you better be careful because it is extremely difficult to get out of a lease. Extremely. Like in Ontario, if you sign a contract, there's a 48-hour waiting period where you can back out, but not with RTA or lease law. If you sign a document, you're locked in the minute you sign it. All right, so you need to be very careful when signing a document. Lifestyle. You know, how do I know the rules when living with people? So that's where, like I said, we've suggested doing a roommate agreement so you have an idea beforehand. Divide chores, talk about, you know, it's a good idea if you to have an agreement that says nobody will bring a friend over the night before you have an exam. Things like that. Or if you care about smoking, you know, do you have rules about they have to be outside? Things like that. You need to be aware of city bylaws. This is probably more important if you're in a house versus an apartment building, but you know, there are rules around noise. In the City of London, it's 24/7. So I've seen students get tickets for noise at 10 a.m. The City of London, this is where an apartment building with a garbage chute makes a lot easier, but City of London has an 8-day schedule, so it's a different day every week that garbage picks up. And if you have a vehicle, probably less likely of a concern for international students, but there are rules about parking on the street, etc. What is the landlord required to do once I'm in the place? We recommend take pictures, date stamp pictures when you first move in, and especially if anything doesn't work. And if they don't, make sure you send something to the landlord in writing. Windows in places are supposed to have screens between June 15th and September 15th. So if screens aren't there, they're required. And the windows must work. All bedrooms must have windows. Talked about the detectors that are required. This is a really important one. The law requires that the place be 20 degrees Celsius during the day and 18 degrees Celsius at night. If you pay utilities, then it's up to you to put the temperature up or down. You know, I know this is the minimum, but I'm going to tell you, my house is at 22 degrees because I could not live at 18 degrees at night. I'd find it too cold. Landlord must provide hot and cold running water. They can shut it down for a few hours if they're doing maintenance or whatever, but they can't say to you, you haven't paid your rent, I'm going to cut off your water. That's illegal. Same thing with electricity, must be provided. Bug and rodent removal is the landlord's responsibility. They can only provide or only bill you for bug and rodent removal if they can show that you brought the problem in. So I'll give you an example. We've had students put a year's worth of garbage in the attached garage of the house. That's happened more than once. That obviously attracts squirrels, rats, mice, whatever. And in that case, the landlord could hire a company, remove it, and bill you for whatever it costs them. We've had students put a year's worth of empty beer bottles in the kitchen corner. Stale beer attracts cockroaches. So in that case, again, the landlord could bill the tenant. They can't just arbitrarily assume an amount. They have to show you a bill of the work that they've done. But you would be responsible. But if you do normal cleaning, lifestyle stuff, you don't have to pay for bug or rodent removal. All right. One of the things that we know from research is if you're comfortable in your space, you'll do better as a student. You'll have more success. So we recommend, and just by being here, you have, you're much farther ahead than other students that are just walking into a place and aren't sure what the rules are and stuff like that. So we highly recommend you take this information. Again, I've gone over it fairly quickly. So, but Crystal has indicated very quickly that it'll be on. It's a YouTube channel, and you'll be able to stop and start it to pull off websites and information. But if you have, we don't find housing for people, but like I said, there is the Fanshawe website, and that's my email. If you have questions or you want a lease looked at, or just something you weren't sure about along the way, or you have a landlord that's saying something to you that it just seems a little odd, just send me a note and I'll get back to you. I don't work 24/7, but I'm here. People think we get the whole summer off, but we're here throughout the summer. I do take a few holidays here and there, but we are here in the summer as well. So we'd be happy to help and answer questions for people.
And Glenn, I have just uploaded your presentation into the chat.
Great.
So I've just put that in there.
Great.
I think there is a question, Glenn, just asking for your email ID.
So it was on that last screen, second last screen, but G Matthews, GMATTHEWS at fanshawe.ca.
So if you didn't get the presentation, that's likely going to be that you are using your phone to join the presentation and it doesn't get sent to the phone. So you can email Fanshawe Cares at fanshawe.ca and we can send you out a copy of today's presentation.
Somebody's asking about on-campus housing. You'll need to talk to them directly. It's a different area that you'll need to talk to directly. The student didn't say if they're coming in January or next fall. So, but I do know from a meeting I had earlier this week that they do have vacancies in residence. So you might pester them a bit to find out.
I have added their email as well. So it's residence acceptance at fanshawe.ca.
Somebody's asking about timeline for lease review. We're pretty quick. It's usually under 24 hours that we get back to people, unless you send it late on a Friday, then it's not going to be heard until Monday morning. I don't think there was anything else. I mean, like I said, I know it's daunting for people coming halfway around the world to a place they don't know or aren't aware of and stuff like that. But by being here today, you're way ahead of even people from Ontario looking for a place in London. You've got more information than most people. So the problem is, like I said before, you need to have patience. Unfortunately, I understand with the pandemic, it's made looking for off-campus housing that more difficult. One of the reasons for that is some landlords have decided not to rent because they're worried about people bringing in COVID or whatever. So there is a certain amount of stock that's been taken off the market. The good thing is, well, not good for right now, but the good thing is there are a lot of developments planned in the near future, particularly at the South Campus, but even at the main campus, there are a bunch of new buildings that are planned, but it's not going to help us in the immediate future.
And there is a couple messages in the chat there. So someone is just asking if they should have a job prior to choosing their lease accommodation.
Well, it might help along the way. What you should at least be aware of, where are the bus routes, so that I can think about, okay, if I'm going to get a job, how close is the bus so I can get back to wherever I'm living. So it's a personal choice. But I would suggest become very familiar with bus routes. You might as well, you get a bus pass. It's a good way to get around. You know, you can get across the city in half an hour easily probably from the farthest places. The only thing would be, you might think about the Oxford, Richmond corridors because they have express buses that will get you around. The city's in the process of building bus rapid transit, but they're not there yet. So that's why I'm suggesting the Richmond, Oxford corridors for express buses.
And there's a question about renting with Airbnb.
Most Airbnbs are not covered by the RTA. They're more expensive usually. You got to think of an Airbnb like a hotel. So it's under what's called the Innkeepers Act. So landlords are generally happy to take your money, but it's an expensive way to do things. If you are we're not allowed to recommend a particular place, but if you are thinking of looking at a temporary place to come land and then look for a place, Airbnb is one way to do it. We have suggested the cheapest, most flexible place to land would be what's called the guest house on the mount. It's pretty bare bones, but it's on 2 bus routes, but it's not very convenient for Fanshawe students. But it is a place that you could land. It's a former nun's residence, so it's just like a dormitory. So individual bedrooms with a washroom down the hallway. Probably no cooking stuff. So it's really only kind of a temporary place that you want to consider. Somebody's asking about 15-day extension. That has to go through the registrar's office.
Because it's level 1, it would actually go through our office. And I did note there that it's not likely to be approved.
Okay.
15 days is a bit too far into the term, but you can send an email to international@fanshawec.ca, which I also put in the chat, just explaining your situation, but I don't think it would be approved.
Somebody asked about utilities for on-campus housing. No, it's all in, right? You pay a set fee and utilities are not extra.
Yeah, and depending on the style, so if you're in one of the on-campus buildings, then you do have a meal plan worked into your fees. And if you're in the Kestrel style, which is the townhouses, then there's no meal plan component.
Somebody's asking about a roommate paying rent or whatever for them. If you and the other person know each other and stuff and you're comfortable with that, fine, but I wouldn't do it unless you got something in writing that says you're going to get paid back. But even if you don't know the person, don't ever do that. Don't, because you may never see your money again along the way. Somebody's asking about on-campus housing. It's private bedroom, but shared common area. Somebody's asking monthly rent, do you have to be covered by RTA? No. Lots of landlords will, even if they're not covered by RTA, will ask for a monthly rent. However, the rules do change. And if you're not covered by the RTA, the landlord could ask for all of the rent up front. So you need to be aware of that. Somebody's asking about a meal plan at Kestrel Court. Yeah, you can still get a meal plan. It's slightly different, but you can do that. Somebody asked if somebody's renting a room in a house that they're renting. You can do that, and that's perfectly legal, but you have no protection of law. If you're a tenant of a tenant, you're not covered by the RTA. Some landlords will ask for a credit report. Most won't, because they know students don't have a credit rating. But some will, and it is what it is with regards to things. That's where it's like asking for a guarantor. Asking for a guarantor from international students is somewhat useless because the guarantor can't, if they live outside the country, can't be sued if the tenant doesn't pay the rent. But if you have an uncle or somebody, an aunt, somebody living in the country that could act as your guarantor, that would be fine as well. Somebody's asking about the price of on-campus housing. If it's on campus, you're going to be required to pay it. So if you have issues with the amount, you contact them directly about a payment plan. I'm not sure how about sublink, if that can be proved as residency. And as long as you've got something in writing that says you live at a certain address, that's proof of residency along the way. Somebody's asking what to do to be covered by the RTA. As long as you're not a tenant of a tenant or sharing a bathroom or kitchen with the owner or the owner's immediate family, you're automatically covered. Somebody's asking about food not included. I don't know if that's for on campus or off campus. The fee for on campus usually includes a meal plan. Off campus, the rents I'm mentioning do not include food. That's why I'm suggesting you go and get our budget page and do that. And you get a sense of what it's going to cost you. Somebody's asking about paying rent in advance for up to 5 months. I would never do that, ever. However, I understand if you can't provide a guarantor, you may have to pay more than 1 month to get the landlord to waive it. But you don't do that unless you can absolutely, unequivocally know that the rental exists. People asking for that kind of money tend to be scams. So be aware of that, all right? Some people are asking about homestay. I don't have a lot of information on homestay. There are individuals, Crystal, there would be a link off the website somewhere for homestay.
Yeah, we do have a link for that too. And homestay is actually probably a pretty good option if you're unsure of where to stay. And if you want more of a family setting, they do provide meals and you would eat with a family. So it really depends on what style of living you want. I think for younger students, that can often be really helpful to come and stay with a family. But yes, you would contact CHN directly, and then they would place you with a matched host.
The only thing, again, would be you're not covered under the RTA, not covered by the law. So it's whatever the landlord dictates, those are the rules. You need to be aware of. I'm trying to read some of it's going by so quickly. The link for the budget plan, you should be able to get it off the off-campus housing website under renting tools with it. The website's recently within the last year's changed a little bit, so it's a little bit varied, but it is there. Maybe go on the homepage and just go or search the homepage for budget plan. Somebody's asking about leaving a 12-month lease in the middle of it. As I noted in the presentation, it is very difficult to get out of a lease if you're covered by the RTA. All right. There's 3 ways: negotiation with the landlord, which most landlords won't do it, finding somebody to replace yourself, or going through the legal process because you have a legitimate concern. None of which are easy. And I'm going to tell you the legal process. Normally, before the pandemic, it was a 4 to 6 week wait to get a hearing date. I heard last week it's 8 months to get a hearing date Now, it's called the Landlord Tenant Board, and it's taking forever. It's bogged down. Now, the government might clear this up, but that's basically how long. So don't sign a lease unless you are absolutely sure you're going to keep it. A lot of people keep asking about the meal plan stuff. I'm not responsible for, sorry, I can't answer the meal plan stuff.
I actually can. So the meal plan is a set amount of money that is put towards the meal plan, and you can use it. You can have 2 meals a day, 1 meal a day, 3 meals a day. You can just eat snacks. So it's really for you to use whatever way you want at the food services. So some students may get dinner every day, and that's like the only meal that they eat out. And that, of course, their meal plan money is going to go a bit further. So it really just depends on your preference. And then once you spend that money, the meal plan money is just gone, and you can either upload more money to your fan card or just use debit, etc.
Somebody's asking about the usual rents. I did have that in the presentation. So typically it's anywhere $550 to $700, but I'm going to suggest you don't be surprised if you're across the street from the college. It's closer to $850 in a shared accommodation. You're probably going to pay anywhere for a 1-bedroom apartment, $1,300 to $1,500 a month along the way. Somebody asked about 40 minutes away from the college. Not the worst thing in the world if you're used to, like, you know, students in Toronto. I talked to some people from a university in Toronto, and their students are commuting 90 minutes one way on average. So 40 minutes is not the worst thing, but what you want to do is look at the bus routes so that you actually have a way to get to the college. All right, it's really important. 40 minutes, that's about as far as you will ever go to, like, the college is in the east end of the city, and I'm in the southwest corner of the city where I live. There's actually a bus close to my front door that will take me right to the college, but it's about a 50-minute bus ride along the way. Somebody's asking about cheaper rent on campus. At this point, I'm not saying it won't change, but they won't generally provide cheaper rent for sharing a room on campus. Whether that might change in the future or not, I don't know, but they won't do that at this point. Somebody asked about getting receipts when you sublet. And how, you know, how it will affect taxes. Technically, you don't need receipts to file your income tax unless you're audited. All right, so you could submit your taxes without receipts unless you're one of the unlucky ones that get audited, which is unlikely, but it's a possibility. So I might suggest that that be part of your roommate agreement, right? Or you have the amount in the roommate agreement and you file that with your taxes, right? So you have a sense. But I think it's better if you actually write in the sublet agreement that receipts will be provided. Somebody's asking about Foundry First across the street, across Oxford from the college. You'd have to contact them directly to see if they have anything available. We're not privy to what landlords have available and things like that. Somebody's asking, other than a lease agreement, is there something else that might prove that they have residency? Usually the government wants some kind of document that says you live at a particular address. And it would be somewhat difficult. You might, if you get something mailed through old school mailed to your address, it might help, but not likely. Usually you need something to be able to verify. Somebody asking about Airbnb and putting your credit card on it. It's like putting your credit card on anything online. Anything online could be scammed, I guess. You just need to make sure you're dealing properly with the proper Airbnb site along the way. Somebody asking about areas to live. Like I said, London's 400,000, so it has problems that any city of that size, but generally it's a fairly safe city. I mentioned if you go on the London Police Service website, they have a crime map, so you can check. But generally speaking, and unfortunately, students are actually one of the bigger targets because they don't lock their doors. But generally, London is a fairly safe city. Somebody's asking about Toronto. How about me, Toronto, Ontario? I'm not sure what that means.
So that's going to refer to the Toronto campus, and the Toronto campus is self-sustaining. So they have all their own resources, and I'm not sure exactly which those are because we don't really work in tandem with them. So you would need to contact the Toronto campus specifically to find out what supports and stuff they have.
Somebody's asking about the lease agreement, what it should include. If you're covered by the Residential Tenancy Act of Ontario, the landlord is required to use the Ontario Standard Lease, and you can Google it, right? It'll pop up. If you're not covered by the RTA, the big things are the address, the rental time period, the amount of the rent to be paid, the payment dates, and any rules that are required in the house. Some people say you can only do laundry on Sunday night. Some people say you can only do laundry after 7 o'clock at night. So just want to, or meals can only happen at certain times, things like that you want to include. Most rentals are covered by the RTA, so you just simply use the standard lease. But again, if you have any questions about what you've been presented with, send it to me and I'll give you feedback on it. Happy to do that. Somebody's asking about on-campus housing for 1 month. Generally, that's not possible, but as I said, I know they've had a few vacancies, so they might alter that. So you need to contact them directly to see if they'll consider it. Homestay can vary for pricing, depending on meals, things like that. It shouldn't be, the basic rent shouldn't be much more than sharing a room in a house, but the meals can add anywhere from 100 to 300 a month, depending on, are you just having dinner? Are you having breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Things like that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, any specific questions on residence, on homestay, on any of those sorts of options, if you send an email to Fanshawe Cares, which I've put in the chat a couple times, we should be able to send you out a response.
Yeah.
So I think if that's it for questions, and this has been a really active session, thank you guys for all participating so actively. It really makes a difference when there's a lot of questions, and I think it's helpful to see things from the students' perspective, because we are doing the presentation based on what we think you might need to know. But it's really great because as you guys are asking us things, it's like, oh yeah, maybe we should include or know about that. So thank you all. Thank you, Glenn, so much for joining us today.
I like lots of questions because that does keep us invigorated with regards to responses and stuff. So just one last one. Somebody asking about transportation to the St. Thomas campus. That actually came up at the meeting I was at earlier this week, and unfortunately right now there isn't. You'd have to figure out a way to work your way down there. But thank you. Like I said, just by being here, you're way ahead of everybody else as far as knowing what you need to know about renting.
Completely agree. And thank you all. Thank you, Glenn. And make sure to join us Monday. We are going to have more care here. So we are going to talk about the health plan. So that's a great one to make sure you are joining us for. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you again, Glenn.
Take care.